Have you ever had a dream about someone who has passed on, whether it was good or bad? Today, we're going to talk about the value, significance, and importance of these grief dreams. I'm Risa Morimoto, your host. I'm an integrative nutrition health coach, and you're watching Modern Aging, where we chat about innovative and holistic ways to elevate our health and well-being as we age. If you're new to the channel, I'd love for you to subscribe. All you got to do is click on that little red button below with that little bell next to it to be sure to be notified whenever a new episode is uploaded. And if you want to go and check out our website, thisismodernaging.com, for all of our latest programs, events, and articles. So today my guest is Dr. Joshua Black. He is a researcher in the area of grief dreams. In fact, he's one of the leading people who's kind of pioneering this area of research to understand the significance of grief dreams after having one of his own after his father passed. I think you're going to find it fascinating. I certainly did. I actually even got triggered and remembered a dream that I had about my own mother. So I hope that you'll check this one out. Hi, Joshua. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you because grief is something that I talk about quite a bit, and I think it's super important to kind of talk about it openly. And you focus on grief dreams, which I find fascinating. But before we kind of get into that, if you could kind of give me a little bit of your background, how you even came to start studying grief dreams. So why don't we just start from there?
Okay, that's a good plan. My whole life really, started or changed anyways after my dad died. So I wanted to be an elementary school teacher. That was my goal since I was a kid, and my dad really wanted that from me. So I was really pursuing that and didn't really have a plan B. That was my plan A. And then my dad died in one of my final years of university, and it completely broke me. It was the first time I had a significant loss, and the way my dad and my relationship is that we were rebuilding it at that time. Throughout my whole life, I was very scared of him. He used alcohol as a way to cope. He had a poor way of regulating his emotions. So I was always distant from him. And then, the last 2 years after my mom and him got divorced, he started treating me, and he wanted to know more about me. So he didn't really see me. He wasn't trying to tell me what to do anymore. He was actually trying to be my friend in a way. He wanted to get to know me. And so I really enjoyed that. And so I was really excited for what this relationship could be. And then, said like that a year and a half later, when we started to rebuild that, I get a call that he's died. And for me, like that news, it's so unexpected. I wasn't even thinking that death was even real at that time. It's just something that, happened to other people. But when I got that news,
How old were you at the time?
I was 24. And I just started crying. And as a good male in my society, it was probably one of the first times I've cried in I don't know how many years. So it was so foreign to me. I didn't know how to process not only sort of those emotions, but even just having tears was so strange for me and very uncomfortable. But there's nothing I could do to suppress them, which I usually have done. And so I was just crying for about 3 days there, and the thoughts that went through my mind were very scary. I wanted to quit. I wanted to drop out of school. I wanted to just travel to places that we were going to go together. And I was just lucky I had a partner at that time to basically say, wait till you're done school. And so I finished school, and I didn't want to be an elementary school teacher anymore for whatever reason. But I will state that something did happen to change my grief. So it was 3 months after my dad died, I had my first dream of him. And for me, I wasn't asking for one. I didn't know you could even get these. Like, people didn't talk about them. But
what do you mean you had, like, he was in your dream, or it was one of those dreams that felt real, as though he was still alive?
It felt pretty real. It felt different than other dreams, the best way to put it. And I should state, so after after his death, I went back to school and work. And what happened was all the joy came out of my life, but I also stopped crying. And so one would say I'd probably be depressed for that 3 months period there. The color of the world was gone. And so I was just living the way I needed to live to survive. And then that's when this dream happened. So that's why the dream is so significant in my life, because I don't know where I'd be without it, because it completely changed me in many ways. And so I'll tell you the dream. So I was in my room, sleeping. So in the dream, I was still in my room, and he was at the other end looking at all the stuff in my room. And I say that because at that time, I kind of collected a little too many things. I got it from him, which I think is the beauty of that dream. But I've changed my ways since. But at that time, he was looking through some of my stuff, and he was like really interested, like he hasn't seen it before. And then, but he looked healthy, and he looked really light and happy, and said he was so, like, in waking life, he always had this heaviness to him because of, past traumas and the way he coped. But in that dream, he was so light and almost free is the best way to put it. And so I walked up to him and I said, "I'm going to miss you," acknowledging his death. Then he smiled.
That's what you said to him?
That's what I said to him. And I said that I loved him. And then we hugged and I woke up. And the craziest part was when I woke up, all the color was back into my life. Like, it was the craziest experience. I remember sitting at the edge of the bed thinking, what was that? And how do I feel so, like, how did that change me? Because it wasn't interpretation. The dream itself changed me. And I look back after doing so much research on the topic, and there's a couple things, right? Like, I never got a chance to say goodbye in the dream that I did. But I also never got a chance to tell him that I loved him. And I wouldn't have realized how important that was to me at that time. But just like I didn't cry, in our relationship, we never told each other we loved each other. Last time was probably when I was a kid. I heard that. It was just almost implied. And so that was really amazing to sort of hear. But also there was this love and this peace in the dream that I think has a significant impact in how we can process our grief. And so those three things I think were so remarkable. And then I woke up and I did a 180. The color was back. I was laughing. I can also cry again. And so it was just a phenomenal experience. I just sat in the mystery of that.
Wow.
I didn't understand what it was. I just sat in the mystery. And then after I turned down sort of being a teacher, I started to volunteer with the bereaved. And this is when I actually realized how important the topic was. For me, I knew it was important, but I never really made the connection to, I wonder what other people are dreaming about. It never really crossed my mind. And then I started volunteering at a hospice, and they do bereavement support. And so when I was doing that, people kept asking about dreams, why they didn't have dreams, why we're having these negative dreams, what does this dream mean? And as a good academic, I looked at the research and there wasn't anything there for them. And so that was a moment I thought, could I research this for them and answer some of the questions? Because it was interesting to me, because I had mine, but they were the positive dreams. And they weren't having that, or they wanted them. So that's where my journey led me, and I was able to actually, do it, to go MA and PhD and research the topic that has just really been unexplored.
Why do you think this area is so unexplored? Because I think dreams in general, people are fascinated with, right? There's something that I don't know what it reveals in our subconscious, or whether, and Dr. Chris Kerr, and that I interviewed him about, people's last moments when they're in hospice, or, when death is imminent. And they often have dreams of people who have passed on while they're still living. Are your grief dreams including that sort of thing, or it's of people who've already passed? And like for someone like you, your death is not imminent, yet you're having these dreams about your loved ones, right? As far as I know, anyway.
That's right. It's so true, and that's why I think you need to talk about this, because I have heard people comment that if they're dreaming of the deceased, it means they're going to die soon, because they're taking the viewpoint of what Christopher Kerr, his research is talking about. But it's not actually true for people who are grieving. And so that's why it's very interesting. Why it hasn't been studied?
Right.
It's just one of those things. I think dreams in general have been undervalued in our culture, and because of that, I think people are scared to go in that direction, because a lot of it's based on funding. Where can you get funding to do your research? And this wouldn't be a topic I think people would get funding, and maybe they didn't have the dreams, or maybe if they had the dreams, they're already too far in their own research to explore them. But I think one of the other issues is that no one talked about the dreams. People were afraid, like the bereaved can be very cautious about sharing these experiences. And so I think a lot of people who worked in the field just never heard them as much as, and never realized the full impact of these and how common they really are. But I think now it's, a lot of people are understanding that just through my own research. And so hopefully as we move forward, it'll definitely pick up and people won't be so scared or won't avoid the topic as they once did. But yeah, like all the stuff that Dr. Christopher Kerr is doing actually relates a lot to what I'm finding, which I think is the most fascinating part of it all, is that they start actually when you're grieving, and then as time goes on, they continue, but they change in many ways. So in the beginning, these dreams of the deceased, what happens is they deal with your grief and your loss. As you move forward and you start processing that, they change. So let's say you're going through a breakup, or let's say you're in a pandemic. I've been getting a lot of pandemic dreams lately. And so rather than trying to comfort you through your grief, they're comforting you in the pandemic to try to give you hope, to reduce isolation, stuff like that, or even provide you answers to questions that you have. And then at end of life, they change once again, and they help individuals as they transition from life to death. And I think that is why these dreams are so unique and why we need to study them so much more, because they just don't stop like after the grieving's done. They keep happening in very important moments in our life to help us in many ways.
So what if people don't have these dreams and they're grieving? I think that that's always the thing, right? It's like, oh, why doesn't mom visit me, or why doesn't dad visit me? And then they feel like left out or something.
That was one of the reasons why I went and looked at and wanted to do the research. So why do some people have these dreams and other people don't? Because they can be very comforting and very loving, and even for people who aren't spiritual. I think like a lot of times when people do talk about this subject, it is from the angle of a visitation in some way, but it's actually not the case. There's a lot of, actually, when I did the research, spirituality had no impact in if people had these dreams or not. They're just different in the sense of the context. So some people will have relived memories if they're not spiritual, or they'll have those beautiful moments, but nothing is mentioned about the afterlife. But if someone who's spiritual, they'll say something about the afterlife, or maybe there'd be an angel or Jesus in there if you're Christian in some way. But people are still having this, and they're both very loving, and they both can change you. Just how you interpret it may be a little bit differently.
So what do you mean by that spirituality isn't really a part of their interpretation? So it's just basically they're having a dream and they happen to be in it and they're alive, or
yeah. So two people. So one person who's spiritual will have a dream, and when they wake up, they may say that was a visitation dream. Another person has a very similar dream and will say no, it wasn't, and their interpretation is that it's different than other dreams they've had. But they just sit in the mystery of it. They don't jump to it's a visitation. But the unique thing is people have a very similar theme, that it's really about love and seeing the individual and hearing something from them. It's sometimes, say if it's about their grief, it's about easing their grief in some way, or answering stuff like to say that they love them still, or to say that that they're going to be okay. And these are things I think we just need to hear and need to feel as we sort of process our loss. And so to go back to the original question, so when I looked at what factors actually predict dreaming of the deceased, I looked at it within 2 studies, spousal loss and also pet loss, and replicated the research, which was always great. And what I found was that has said nothing to do with spirituality, nothing to do with grief or one's personality. Everything, the most important factor actually was dream recall in general. So those people who remember more dreams in general will remember more of these types of dreams. And so for me, that was just a great scientific explanation why people aren't having these dreams. And so when you ask people who aren't having dreams, how often do they remember their dreams? Most of the time, they're going to say not very often. And then you can connect those dots for them and really say, well, then how are you supposed to catch one of these dreams? And that's really what it is. It's more about catching it than anything. We're dreaming throughout sleep. And so there's a lot of dreams that we're just not remembering. And that's the mystery of sleep in many ways. But that actually can help reduce a lot of the complications that people do have, the jealousy people may have, or some people will use not having a dream to say that maybe they don't love them anymore, or they love other people more because they're having dreams, or maybe they didn't cross over if they're spiritual, or maybe they're angry at me, so they're restricting their visit in many ways. So this allows people to just realize that they probably are having dreams of the deceased, they're just not remembering them.
That's crazy. I mean, I know that people are so fascinated by dreams, including me. So what do you suggest for those who maybe don't really have good recall in terms of their dreams? Are there certain things that they can do if they're interested? I mean, is it the type of thing where they keep a dream journal or?
And that's the beauty of dreams. They're not set in stone. So you can increase them, your recall rate, or even decrease them. And I will say 10% of the population just doesn't remember recalling dreams at all, even though they are dreaming. But for those people who are dreaming, even in some fashion, what's really interesting about the mind is that if you want it, you can have it. You just have to value these experiences a little bit more. And our culture, Western culture anyways, really devalues dreams. First time I ever heard about the value of dreams was really in university in a fourth year course. So most people will go around their life not really understanding what dreams represent and the research on them. And so what people can do is, research has shown, just by valuing these dreams, like listening to this may trigger a dream, talking about it, but really writing down your dreams is showcasing that you want to remember them for a long-term basis. And so what you're saying is I want these, I want to remember them. And so by doing that, you're going to increase your recall rate, which is, I tried it, which is actually, it was really interesting. So I heard about the research, I tried it. I remembered about, 4 dreams a week at that point. The average is around 1 or 2. Anyway, so I started doing the exercise and just writing down all my dreams. I started remembering like 4 dreams a night. It got insane. So I had to stop writing them down. And now I only write down my more significant dreams. But that's how easily it can go. And you can go the opposite way. If you're remembering too many, you just stop valuing dreams, stop thinking about them, and they'll decrease remembering them. It's a memory issue more than anything. And then, the other thing you can do, so that can help with the recall rate, but there's another thing called dream incubation. And research has shown that you can incubate different things in your dreams by thinking about it. And so it hasn't been done with these types of dreams before, but I've heard people who, have done similar things that it did help. Some people didn't. But what you want to do here is you want to actually write down a dream you want to have of the deceased and really think about it before bed. And I think that's one of the key things is that, what we think about prior to bed really has a huge influence on the dreams that we remember. And so you probably realize this by the shows you've watched or things you talked about, in the later half of the day. You'll see in your dreams in many ways. And same thing with this. So what you can do is just, write down a dream you want to have, think about it, and sort of just, put yourself in that imagery as you fall asleep. And you should have a higher likelihood of actually having a dream with the deceased in it. It'd probably be different than the one that you created, which I think is interesting in itself. But at least it's a moment in time where you can see them one more time and even hear their voice.
I'm going to try that. I'm totally going to try that tonight.
Why not? Why? Who will you pick?
Probably my mom. Both my parents passed within the last year and a half, and I think about them a lot. But yeah, no, that would be interesting. So you write a grief journal, you start remembering dreams. I'm imagining that not everybody has a positive outcome like you did. I mean, I think your dream was probably very significant. It was kind of like on the higher end of the scale. I mean, you must see different sorts of interpretations. I mean, in your research.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the questions I came in with is that why is some people having these very meaningful dreams or positive dreams and other people are having more negative dreams? And so I actually looked at that in the research, and what I found is that negative dreams actually interesting point is that people who do remember dreams, it's more likely to remember a positive dream than a negative dream. And that is very unique in many ways. So when we look at just dream research in general, what we need to understand is that dreams represent our waking life. And so when we're happy and joyful, we're going to have more positive dreams. When we're negative or we're feeling negative, sad, angry, we're going to have more negative dreams. And so that's what research has shown. And it's a good sort of starting point for understanding our dreams. And so with that, you look at trauma, and after trauma, you have even more consistently negative dreams. So grief would be somewhere probably in between. On average, people remember negative dreams, even without trauma. It's just that's how we think, right? We're watching the news before bed, we're worrying about that sort of stuff. So it creeps into our dreams. So grief would be somewhere in between the two. And what's interesting is that we would expect a lot of people to have negative dreams of the deceased. That's what I went in with, thinking that I was just like the outlier. Not true. And this is a very unique thing about these dreams is that most people are having positive dreams of the deceased, not negative. And I think those people who have had a dream, it was around 90% had a positive experience and about 40% to 25% are having had one negative experience, at least one negative experience. And so when I looked at the research to understand this, what I found is that these distressing dreams are related to trauma is one of the things, and you can sort of see that with PTSD and the flashbacks people can have within their dreams, the reenactments of the death. And so this is where the deceased is dead, dying, or ill. And then you can have these dreams where it's more based on an individual's guilt or anger or blame. And that's why I saw that in the research also. So, that could be the deceased, criticizing them or chasing them in many ways, or feeling helpless and not being able to save the person, which, a lot of people can have. And so, and so what the theory goes, that I have anyways, is that people are probably having more of these negative experiences in the beginning, and then as they work through their trauma and their loss, they'll have more of these positive dreams. Because what was interesting in the research was that those who had a negative experience, over 90% also had a positive dream of the deceased too. So I think that's really fascinating, because it is going against what we would typically find when it comes to regular dreams. So these are unique in many ways. And I do want to say and mention how frequent these are. So just in looking at spousal loss, it was 86% of widows and widowers and other partners had a dream within the first year or two of the deceased. And I think that those numbers, like 86%, that's like most people. If 10% aren't dreaming in general, like you're catching a lot. So most people are going to be experiencing this type of dream. And after pet loss within the first 6 months, it was 78%. And then after miscarriage, it was 57%. So they're dreaming of the child that they've never seen, which I think is interesting in itself. And then children can also have these experiences. And 55% after a parent died had a dream of the deceased. So, you really see this, how common it is. And this is why I'm now really shocked that we haven't looked at this more, just because most people in the grieving process will experience this dream in some way. And so then you have the dream, and then you have the interpretation. Like, if we don't talk about this stuff, we need to, it can actually hinder us in our grieving process in many ways. Which leads me to the next
question, in terms of the grieving process, and how do you feel like dreams can really help us? I don't think it stops grieving. I feel like we're on a continuum. It's just like different phases of grief.
Yeah.
But how do you feel like, and maybe with all your research, how do you feel like dreams kind of fit into all of this in terms of the process?
Well, you look at even instead of the negative dreams first. I think that's a good starting point. You can learn a lot about what you're struggling with. And grief is so hard. Understanding our emotions is so hard. It's very complex because we're using our experiences to try to interpret where we are. And if we're avoiding our loss without really knowing it, or shutting down our pain, we may think we're further than we actually are. And these dreams can really help showcase some of the blocks that are going on within us. And so, I could share a dream from a widow. Anyway, she had this dream, and it was repeated, and she had her husband kept coming back into the dream. And in the dream, he would say that he'd want to be together again. And she would say, I can't, I'm with someone else. And then he said, if you're not going to be together with me anymore, I want all the money that you inherited.
What?
And if you give me that, I'll leave you alone. And she's like, why are you such a mean and heartless person to do something like this, to make me think that you're dead, but you're alive the whole time, and you want all this money. And then he became threatening to her and her new partner. And so she thought this was actually a visitation. And this is why we need to use discernment when we understand how these dreams actually connect to our waking life. Because they're actually, you can learn a lot about where you are in the grieving process. So in this, when you actually talk to the individual, what you find is that the first thing is this partner was a huge red flag if you look at the dream. And so you ask about it. And, it's how hard it must be for someone to love someone, or to have someone die and then start a new relationship, right? Like, it gets to be so difficult because the partner can put pressure on you to avoid your own grief in many ways. And so I'm not sure if that was going on, but it seemed like it was an issue that she's still working through. Trying to love two people at the same time, very difficult. We haven't practiced that in many ways. And so, how do you grieve while also starting a new relationship? That's tough. And the other thing, when you look at that dream, you see the money. So why is he talking about this money? You don't get a lot of dreams like that. And then when you ask her about it, she says that One of the hardest things she's ever had to deal with when it came to her grief was of receiving the inheritance, because as she saw it, it was unjust. He worked so hard for all the money, but yet she's the one that gets to enjoy it. And so she's having a very difficult time processing that because the feelings of it being unjust. And then she's also using that new money on the new relationship too, so it complicates things a little bit more. And then, so those are two big flags that if that individual goes to therapy, they could work on those blocks, because that's what the mind's trying to work through. And if you look at your mind or your dreams anyways, as your best friend that's trying to tell you a truth that you don't want to see, well, then there's a lot of tips you can get to sort of how to increase your well-being in waking life. Because at the end of the day, we're still trying to get to know each other, get to know ourselves and who we truly are when we're awake. Our minds, tend to give us all sorts of, nifty interpretations of our behavior. But to know the truth, dreams has a really great way of understanding that. And then when it comes to the positive dreams, well, they can help us in many ways. And one of them, a lot of grief work can happen in there. Like it happened with me, saying goodbye, something that I never got a chance to do, saying I loved you was huge. Developing a continuing bond, it's just something I've also done research in, and that's so important as we move through our grief, is to continue a connection with the deceased in some way, talking about them, remembering them. And these dreams really help people through that. And it can allow people who are spiritual to believe more in an afterlife, to help with their faith, because one of the things with grief is that, their faith gets rocked, and a lot of people will lose their idea of God through that. But these dreams can actually help mend those and help people get back into their community, I think, which is phenomenal. And like all different types, I could go on, but all different types of losses have different types of grief support that happens through it. So after a suicide, you'll have the deceased sometimes saying sorry or explaining why they did it, if that was a question, which is common. Other people, it's just being together, having a new memory, with that individual, or seeing them healthy again. Because a lot of times when people see them at their final stages of life, it can be a very negative and disheartening image. And so now that the last image you have now can be very positive. And what I always love to say is that one of the major themes in all of these dreams is that there's this love that's present, that a lot of people say that they just don't really get in other dreams, and they don't really feel in waking life to the extent that they get it within the dream. And that in itself, I think, has a very therapeutic effect, because if you think about, maybe what the body's trying to do in a way, is that, it's really trying to give you a respite. Because once you can get out of the sadness or depression for a moment, maybe it can do and see things from a new perspective. So when you wake up, you can see your life and the loss in a new perspective. And it's very hard to change your perspective when you're in deep sadness, because all you see is the sadness. But this can actually lift people up to a point where they can maybe see it and then be able to work through some of their grief a little bit more, or in a different way, and process things in a different way. So yeah, there's anyways, that love, I think, is one of the most powerful medicines that I think we have when it comes to these dreams, because I think there's something that goes on. I don't really understand it yet, but I think there's something going on within that presence of love that helps us in many ways process our grief and can allow us to move forward with grief in I would say a different way, or a quicker way than maybe how we're processing before. Because one of the issues I've seen when it comes to just after loss is that the people who die tend to be the ones who let us know that we're loved, to let us know we're valued in society. And when those people die, who's telling us anymore? Like, it's so hard for us to believe it ourselves. And so these dreams continue to reinforce that they're still loved, that they're still valued, that their life is meaningful. And I think that is, one of the things that, for me, it's a powerful effect, because there's only so many people in my life, I count maybe a handful, that really, when I'm down, they tell me, I trust them, that I am still loved. My life isn't, going down, and there's hope. And all of that, can help people work through, and he said, have hope for the future despite
Wow.
the significant loss in their life.
I have you've triggered a bunch of stuff for me, just because my mother was that person. And I think, and it's so funny because I didn't realize that I had these dreams about her. And it was weird because you were talking about it. And so my mother had a massive stroke, and she had Parkinson's. So the end of her life was pretty miserable. And I had a dream of her walking And I just felt so happy for her. I felt so sorry.
No, this is grief, right? This is just the power of being honest on camera, and this is what we need more of. Because without you doing this, people will suppress their emotions, and I'm crying too. It's good, it's okay, and it's just this is life, and this is where dreams fit in, and how it can really provide us to rethink some of our relationships and to understand the value of who they were in our lives in different ways. And I think for you to even see her healthy again, I think what a beautiful, meaningful dream, and then your interpretation on whatever that means for you. But just by your emotions,
she
you can tell
deserved
it's
that,
very meaningful.
More than anyone. But I just,
Well, I'm so happy you had someone like that in your life. And for me, like that, as much as it's sad for them to go, like I always think of all the people that I wish had relationships like that.
I say that all the time, just to be able to love somebody so much and care for somebody so much it's really a gift,
Yeah.
But I mean, you have, so
Yeah.
to get it together now. I mean, I could talk to you forever about dreams because I just love this topic, and grieving itself is just, it's such an important human stage in life that many of us go through, and I feel like we'll all go through it, in varying degrees. But, to be able to interpret them and to be able to track them and to be able to feel like they have more significant meaning than just, I had a dream, and to really help you overcome certain obstacles in your life or whatever is amazing. It's really, really amazing.
It's phenomenal, and it's free. Like it comes, from within us. And I think, there's something beautiful about that we can learn a lot from grief by studying dreams. Because if you think about it, how we learn about grief is from people's grief in waking life. But there's a lot that's going unnoticed with these dreams. And a lot of people will look at stats and say, oh, these people are resilient. Yeah, but are they resilient because of just what they've, their personality, or is it because they've had these dreams that have changed them, which allows them to be more resilient? There's so much that we just don't know, but I think when it comes to researching this topic, we can learn so much more, not only about grief and what people go through, but also what is helping. Because if we understand what we're dreaming about and how that's helping us as we work through our grief, we could utilize those tools in waking life to help the bereaved even to a better extent than we are.
That's so amazing. So if people want to find out more about what you do, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, they can go to my website, griefdreams.ca, and on there's so much information that we'd even touch on. There's common questions answered, and I have a online course, a 9.5-hour course that just talks about this subject from the research perspective and the different, people I've interacted with over the years. So that's a beautiful place if people want to know more. And then I do one-on-one consulting there. And then I have the Grief Dreams podcast if people want to just learn more about this topic from more of a qualitative measure, where people are coming on the podcast, sharing their life, their loss, and how the dreams are meaningful to them in that process.